taking a deep breath, getting ready to talk about Freud's third psychosexual stage of development, the phallic stage. Why am I being so theatric and acting like it's a big deal to talk about this? Because it's controversial. This stage has components that people are most likely to just outright reject. Some people will be like, oh, Freud's got some good stuff. But other people are like, no, this is not correct. All right, so just letting you know, here's where a lot of the controversy lies, a lot of the rejection of Freud's ideas. And this is where, when we talk about sexual desires or sexual pleasure, we are using it in more of the sense that we would use in modern times, talking about sexual relations between like people in a couple. All right. And this is often the stage that when I go over it in person in class, where students will be like, huh, wait, did you just say what you thought you said? All right, so setting you up for that. All right, so first of all, this is called the phallic stage. So we got to talk about the erogenous zone of the phallic stage. So what do you think it might be? And very often I find that students are like, I don't know, that word phallic doesn't mean anything to me. Or if it does, students are like, doesn't phallic mean like having to do with male genitalia? Yes, it does. So the erogenous zone, as Freud originally described it, the erogenous zone is the phallus, which is a word for penis. Now, some students, usually those that present in a feminine manner, they'll be like, what about people who don't have one of those? All right, when Freud first got started with his discussions, his descriptions, he really was focusing on boys, sort of a sign of the time, and, sort of being a little egocentric, perhaps. He as a male, of course, would be focused on those with male anatomy. So he did address the development of girls, but sort of after the fact, later. All right, so, but even for girls, he focused on their thoughts about the penis. So, how is the phallus, the erogenous zone during this time? Well, you can probably imagine, if you've ever been, and by the way, this goes about age 3 to about age 6. If you have ever been around an age 3 to 6 year old boy, you probably know that they are a wee bit obsessed with their penis. They like to touch it. They like to play with it. When it's bath time, they almost seem to be like, hey, it's out. All right. I've had cousins, had a son, worked in childcare situations. Plenty of evidence for this. All right. So this is not the controversial part. The idea that little boys would be perhaps a bit focused on that area of the body, not controversial at all. They do have erections at this age. They're little different than when you have them after puberty, but yes, they do have the experience, and they often, if given the opportunity, they enjoy touching and playing with that area. They're quite fond of it. Now, remember how there's a conflict that that goes along with any one of these stages. All right, to talk about the conflict that goes along with the phallic stage, we have to talk about a very controversial aspect of Freud's theory, is that little boys have an Oedipus complex. All right, so some of you might have heard this name, Oedipus, before, depending on what English classes you've had, or I also took what was it called? A Greek class in college. It was like Greek thought or Greek culture or something like that. It's part of my honors program, but we also talked about Oedipus in that class. I learned about Oedipus in English and in that class. You might not have ever had to read Oedipus Rex. It is a ancient Greek tragic play written by Sophocles. It's okay if you haven't. I will give you a rundown of the plot. It is about an individual who there's a prophecy about him that he is going to one day kill his father and marry his mother. All right, and I'm giving the very short version. All right, and so parents are worried about this. They try to abandon this child. He gets adopted. He gets found and gets adopted. And then guess what? He doesn't know that he's not being raised, by biological parents. He doesn't know that he has biological parents out there. One day while he's traveling, he meets a beggar on the road and gets in a conflict or something, kills him. Doesn't know he just killed his biological father. He unknowingly killed his biological father. And then he goes to a town where their leader is missing. It's because the leader was actually in disguise as a beggar on the road. And he solves the riddle of the Sphinx, and sort of as a reward, he gets to be their new leader, and he gets to marry, I think her position was queen, gets to marry his biological mother. So he didn't know that he was doing these things, but and then horrible things happen. The gods are punishing him for that, essentially. Very short version. I'm not an English professor. English professors don't. I'm telling my students, learn about Oedipus, learn about the play Oedipus Rex from your English professors. They would do a better job than me. All right, why am I talking about this play? What does it have to do with the phallic stage? The phallic stage, the Oedipus Complex, has to do with these young boys having sexual desires for their mother, wanting to be with their mother sexually. And I'm not speaking figuratively here, actually having sexual desires in the sense that we would use it in modern terms, and wanting to get their father out of the way. Their father is like competition for their mother's affections. So it would be like the little boy's fantasy to get rid of their father, murder their father, get him out of the way so they could have the mother all to themselves, and they would be her romantic partner. They would have her all to themselves. And this is not based on evidence. Freud came up with these ideas, and people were expected to trust him that that's how things work. All right, so we've established that Freud believed this about little boys. How does it lead to some other important things happening? How do we get to how do we talk about moving on to the next stage, for example? All right, so we haven't even gotten to the conflict of this stage yet. This just leads us up to the conflict. A huge conflict comes about when the little boys fear that their fathers are going to figure out this fantasy of theirs. Their father is going to figure out their intention, their motivation, and they will punish them. Now, if they were to punish them, they would harm them. They would take away the thing that they value most, which is that phallus, that penis. And so they fear that their father is going to castrate them as punishment. So the boy develops castration anxiety. That's the big conflict, is the castration anxiety they experience. Now, how do they deal with all of these feelings that they're having? They have to repress. They have to repress these sexual urges that they're having toward their mother, or they have to repress these urges eventually. Now, another important thing that happens is that to appease their father, to try to convince their father that they're on their side, they're like, "Hey, Dad, I would never harm you." They start to imitate their father. They start to act just like their father. They go through a process called identification. They identify with their father. They start acting just like their father. And originally it's to fool their father into thinking, "Hey, I'm on your side. I would never harm you. I'll never dream of harming you." But over time, they forget that it's an act, essentially. And all of this conflict, all of these emotions and turmoil and fears, all these sexual desires, they get repressed. Remember that word repression? They get pushed down into the unconscious where they cannot bother the individual. The ego has no longer any conscious awareness of any of these feelings. And what's the result of this identification, right? Of acting just like the father? Well, this is how boys learn masculine identity. That's how Freud explained gender. And this is how the superego develops. Remember that superego? Well, you identify that you imitate the father, you also identify and internalize his moral standards. So it contributes to the superego too. All right, that's boys. We need to address girls. So when Freud was forced to address the other half of the human population, he did come up with some explanations for girls. Many people consider them incomplete and unsatisfying. But what did he say about girls? Girls were still focused on the phallus. So little girls were focused on their lack of a penis, their lack of a phallus. They knew, they were aware that the powerful people had penises and they did not have one. They also experienced desire for their father, and it's not really, Freud didn't fully explain well, like what's the source of this desire, but they have desire for their father, and they have resentment of their mother. They resent their mother because they feel that they were born already castrated. That thing that the boy fears so much, girls feel like they've already gotten it. That they were born castrated, and I've also seen it explained that they felt that they were punished for something their mother did. You know, their mother was powerless. She doesn't have a penis, of course she's powerless. She was powerless to prevent it. She allowed this child to be born inferior without a penis. You can see where some of the controversy would come in here. And so Freud said that girls experience penis envy. And they have desire to be with their father, but eventually they repress this desire, and they sort of convert it into desire for a baby. In particular, they would like to have a boy baby. And he even said that if they managed to have an actual boy baby someday, they could experience partial fulfillment. Girls could never experience actual, true, full fulfillment, but by having what he called a penis baby, they could experience partial fulfillment. All right, so this little girl, they are dreaming about having a baby, and they have to get around to identifying with their mother. Why would they want to identify with their mother? They resent their mother for being weak and powerless and allowing them to be born castrated. But their mother also knows how to seduce their father and got a baby. And so they do identify with the mother. They do imitate their mother. They start to act feminine. They learn the feminine gender identity from their mother. And they, like the boys, they eventually repress all of this. They forget that there was ever any kind of an act going along. And they, blanking out. So many things to remember. Yeah. So they are trying to deal with their penis envy. They imitate their mother, and so they learn feminine gender identity, and they also develop their superego. They develop their superego. They learn moral standards from their mother, and all of this traces back to their desire to have that boy baby, to have something like a partial fulfillment. All right, so those controversial ideas from Freud were meant to explain, how we develop morality, how we develop our gender identity, and what happens if there's fixation? What happens if things are not successful with getting over castration anxiety and penis envy? Well, then you'd have issues, like you could have issues related to gender and sexuality. So, and this is also controversial. So if a woman becomes promiscuous, and in Victorian times, Freud was in Victorian Europe, female sexuality was not supported or accepted at all. So you have a sort of a loose definition of what would be considered promiscuous behavior in a woman. But promiscuous behavior in a woman, also things like homosexuality, not a lot of good research at that time. So you have Freud trying to explain it in terms of, something must have gone wrong during the phallic stage. Any kind of gender nonconformity, going against society's gender roles, also could be seen as issues in the phallic stage. And then and compulsive masturbation. All right, so Victorian times, very anti-touching yourself. And so any admission of self-pleasure, that was seen as pathological. And, and Freud would trace that back to, we got to talk about why you have issues with this, what went wrong in the phallic stage. All right, so this is a longer video than the other ones, but that is a brief description of Freud's phallic stage.